High noon hammered down on the prairie crossroads outside Dry River with the merciless intensity of a forge fire. Franklin Hobbs stood in the dust, his calloused hand resting on his daughter's shoulder, not gently, but with the desperate grip of a man making his last gamble. Liesl Hobb, 20 years old and pale as winter moonlight, squinted against the glare that had tormented her since childhood. Her white blonde braid hung over one shoulder, and her pink-rimmed eyes watered in the brightness. The cotton dress she wore, faded blue and patched at the elbows, hung loose on her thin frame. Across the rutted wagon trail stood the Cheyenne warrior. Akacheta was perhaps 28 tall and lean, with the kind of stillness that spoke of danger held in check. His eagle feather war bonnet kept stowed during travel and combat. Worn only in council or ceremony, swayed slightly in the hot wind, the plumes catching light like knives. Bone ornaments and red-blue beadwork decorated his buckskin shirt, and a Navy Colt revolver rested at his hip in a worn leather holster. His dark eyes assessed the transaction with the wariness of a man who had seen too many white promises dissolve into lies. Franklin's voice came rough, urgent, his breath carrying the sour smell of fear and sleepless nights. The arrangement stands as Dr. Sylvia explained. She goes with you north. You get what we discuss later. But it has to be now, right now. Liesl felt the tremor in her father's fingers before he released her. She had learned to read his moods in the spaces between words, the gambling debts he hid the creditors who came with hard eyes and harder threats the nights he locked her in the root cellar with rope around her wrists so the men upstairs wouldn't see his cursed daughter. Protection or shame, she had never been certain which drove him. Now he was shoving her toward a stranger, and wrongness crawled up her spine like spiders. "Father, what?" she began. The rifle shot cut her question in half. Dirt exploded 3 feet from Liesl's boots, the impact sending spray into her face. She gasped, instinct locking her knees, even as her mind screamed to move. A second shot cracked across the prairie closer, and suddenly the Cheyenne warrior was not across from her, but beside her. His body a wall of muscle and leather between her and the hidden shooters. "Run," Akacheta said, his English precise despite the accent. One word, absolute authority. His hand closed around her wrist, calloused, strong, steadying the violent trembling that had seized her, and their eyes met for a heartbeat. She saw no disgust at her pallor in his face, only fierce calculation and something that looked almost like recognition. Fear and a strange, desperate trust collided in her chest. More shots erupted from the tall grass beyond the trail. Men's voices shouted commands. Franklin bellowed something incoherent, but Akacheta was already pulling Liesl toward his paint horse tethered 20 yards away. A bullet ricocheted off the silver concho decorating his belt with a metallic shriek that made her flinch. He boosted her onto the horse's back with surprising gentleness, then vaulted up behind her in one fluid motion. His thighs bracketed hers, his chest pressed against her back, and he kicked the animal into a gallop before she could find the stirrups. The world became speed and terror. Liesl gripped the saddle horn with both hands, knuckles bone white as the prairie blurred past. Behind them, riders materialized from concealment. She counted 4, maybe 5, spurring their mounts in pursuit. Akacheta leaned low over her, his body shielding hers as bullets sang past, with that peculiar whining hiss. She twisted to look back once. Franklin stood motionless in the settling dust, jaw tight, making no move to follow or call her back. His stillness was answer enough. Whatever this was, he had planned it. Sold her, perhaps, or saved her. The distinction blurred as bullets kicked up dirt plumes, and the prairie swallowed them whole. They rode until dusk painted the sky in shades of blood and copper, finally halting in a cottonwood grove, where the dry riverbed still held a trickle of water from hidden springs. Akacheta dismounted first, scanning the terrain with practiced wariness. Satisfied, he helped Liesl down. Her legs trembled as they touched ground. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, brief contact, respectful distance maintained. "We rest here tonight. Move at first light." His English was clear-accented but precise. "You hurt?" "No." Her voice came smaller than she intended. "Who were those men? Radix, maybe Griggs? Does it matter?" He began unsaddling the horse, movements efficient. "They want you back, or dead. Same result for you." Liesl watched him work, noting faded scars on his forearms, the way he favored his left side, slightly old injury perhaps. He noticed her staring and paused. "You have questions. Save them. Questions won't keep us alive." He nodded toward a fallen log. "Sit, I'll make fire." She sat, feeling the day's terror settle into her bones. Her wrists bore faded rope scars from the times Franklin had hidden her during creditor visits, tying her in the root cellar for her own protection. Protection or shame, she had never been sure which. Now she was running again with a stranger, whose language she barely spoke, hunted by men, whose reasons she didn't understand. Akacheta built the fire with practiced hands, then produced a tin coffee pot and provisions from his saddlebag. He worked in silence, and Liesl found the quiet oddly comforting after a lifetime of her father's volatile moods. When the coffee was ready, he poured it into a single tin cup and handed it to her first. "Drink, then sleep. I keep watch." The coffee was bitter and scalding. She drank, feeling warmth spread through her chest. When she tried to return the cup, he shook his head. "Finish it." Night descended, fully bringing cold that bit through her thin cotton dress. Akacheta noticed her shivering and fetched a wool blanket from his gear, draping it across her shoulders without comment. Then he moved his own blanket closer, banking the fire with ashes to keep it smoldering through the dark hours. They sat on opposite sides of the flames, but as the temperature dropped, Akacheta shifted nearer, not touching but close enough that she felt his warmth a buffer against the cutting wind. His presence was solid, unhurried survival, not intimacy dictating the proximity. Coyotes called in the distance. Liesl's eyes grew heavy despite her fear. "Why did you agree to take me?" she asked softly. Akacheta was quiet for a long moment, firelight playing across his face. "Your father brought information, useful, and Dr. Sylvia asked. She has earned trust. But you don't know me." "No." He met her gaze across the flames, expression unreadable. "But I know what it is to be hunted for things you cannot change. I've seen too many people judged by blood or appearance. It's wasteful. Sleep now. Tomorrow we ride hard." She pulled the blanket tighter and lay down on the packed earth, using her arm as a pillow. The last thing she saw before exhaustion claimed her was Akacheta sitting upright, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of light. A guardian or captor, she still couldn't tell which. But he had stepped between her and bullets without hesitation. For now, in this brutal landscape, where water was weaponized and women were currency that had to be enough, Liesl woke to gray pre-dawn light and the sound of labored breathing that didn't belong to Akacheta. Her eyes snapped open. The warrior was already on his feet, rifle raised but not aimed, body tense with controlled readiness. From the cottonwood shadows, a horse stumbled into their camp, lathered, exhausted, barely standing. The rider slumped in the saddle, listing badly. "Father!" Liesl scrambled up, horror punching through her chest. Franklin Hobb looked like death. Blood soaked his entire left side, dark and wet, dripping onto the animal's flank. But his right hand clutched something against his chest with desperate strength, a leather-bound ledger stained and battered. He saw them and tried to dismount, but his legs gave out. Akacheta caught him before he hit the ground. "Easy," the warrior said, lowering him carefully. No time for easy. Franklin's voice was a rasp, each word costing him. He thrust the ledger at Akacheta. Take it. Get it to the U.S. Marshal in Rock Creek. Everything's in there, Voss's trafficking ring, Radek's water theft names and dates and proof. Akacheta took the book, flipping it open with one hand. Pages of cramped handwriting in English script columns of names and numbers, marginal notes. He could read English passably, Army Scouts had to, but this was dense detailed. He caught words: delivery, payment, consent forged, prior claim waived. What is this really? Akacheta's eyes narrowed. Franklin coughed red, flecking his lips. The handover yesterday, it was a ruse. Liesel's my daughter, blood and bone, but Voss was coming for her. Debt repayment, he called it. Planned to process her through his bride scheme or worse. I couldn't. His voice broke. Couldn't let them have her. So I made the deal with you through Dr. Sylvia. Get her away, expose the outfit. Liesel's world tilted. You sold me to save me. I gave you a chance to run. Franklin corrected, eyes fierce despite the blood loss. With someone who might actually protect you, not use you. Akacheta studied the ledger more closely, finding a notation near the back in different, more elegant handwriting. If I vanish, inform Dr. Sylvia M. The spring rights are documented in my boot heel. F must honor them. The initials at the bottom were E.H. Mother's writing, Liesel whispered, recognizing it instantly. Her mother had died when she was 10, a fall from a horse that no one had ever adequately explained. She wrote this. Franklin nodded grimly. Emma documented Voss's early schemes years ago. That note was her insurance. I found it after she died, hid it. Thought I could use it someday to leverage my way out. But it just got deeper, darker. Now it's evidence. Hoofbeats again, multiple riders approaching fast from the south. Franklin's head snapped up, alarm flaring through his pain. They followed my blood trail. Not many, I lost most in the Badlands, but they're persistent. He gripped Akacheta's wrist. Chetas, go north, cross the alkaline flats. Avoid towns. Griggs got deputies in all of them. You need a doctor? I need you gone. Franklin shoved away weakly. I led them away once. I can buy you more time. He looked at Liesel one last time, something broken and fierce in his gaze. You were never cursed, girl. Just different. Your mother loved you. So did I in my ruined way. Now run. Run and finish this. His hand went slack, his eyes fixed on nothing. Franklin Hobb died as the sun broke the eastern horizon, his last breath spent pushing them toward a freedom he would never see. Akacheta gave Liesel 10 seconds to grieve. 10 seconds she spent with her forehead pressed against her father's cooling hand, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. Then he pulled her gently but firmly to her feet. We cannot stay. His sacrifice means nothing if we're caught. She nodded numbly. They left Franklin's body where it lay, covering him with his own coat and marking the spot. Then they rode north as the hoofbeats behind them grew steadily louder. The alkaline flats Akacheta chose were brutal, blinding white expanses that reflected sunlight like mirrors and left no clear tracks. Liesel squinted against the glare, while Akacheta navigated by landmarks only he could identify. They rode hard for 2 hours before stopping at weathered boulders for brief rest. Akacheta examined her feet. The thin shoes had rubbed blisters raw. Without speaking, he pulled willow bark from his supplies, chewed it to pulp, and bound it around her worst heel with cloth. The splint eased the burning pain. He worked with careful efficiency, hands surprisingly gentle. Can you ride more today? He asked. Liesel nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. We make for Bison Trace. Telegraph station there. We can wire Rock Creek from there, maybe arrange escort. They continued north landscape, transitioning to broken sandstone carved into a maze of gullies and canyons. Akacheta navigated with confident precision. It was in a narrow passage that the rattlesnake struck. The buzz cut through silence like a saw blade. The paint horse shied violently. Liesel yelped, grip loosening on the ledger she'd been holding. It tumbled, landing within striking distance of the coiled serpent. The snake struck. Akacheta yanked Liesel backward, his other hand pulling the horse's head hard right. The fangs glanced off his boot heel leather, thick enough to deflect. The horse scrambled up the bank. Akacheta dismounted fast, drawing his knife. "Stay on the horse." But Liesel was already sliding down. "The ledger is not worth venom." He approached the snake carefully, knife ready. Liesel spotted a long stick wedged between rocks. She grabbed it, extended it slowly toward the ledger, and hooked the binding. Dragging it inch by inch, she pulled the book away from the snake, while Akacheta kept the creature's attention with the knife blade's movement. When the ledger was clear, she snatched it up. The snake struck at the stick. She jerked it away just in time. Akacheta backed up, and they retreated together. "Foolish," Akacheta said, but his tone held grudging respect. "Could have been bitten." "So could you." He almost smiled, a brief quirk of his mouth gone before she was certain she'd seen it. They remounted and continued. The sun was angling toward late afternoon when they finally approached Bison Trace from a ridge. Akacheta scouted before descending, watching for signs of ambush. The town looked quiet. Too quiet. They were halfway down the slope when 3 riders emerged from behind the stable-hardened men with the look of hired guns. Akacheta recognized the type instantly. Deaf Dan, an older outlaw missing his left ear. Clubfoot Charlie, who walked with a twisted gait but rode like a demon. And a younger gun, maybe 20, with nervous eyes. "Well now," Deaf Dan called, his voice too loud from his hearing loss. "What do we have here, Indian, and a ghost girl on a stolen horse?" Akacheta turned the horse, but 2 more riders appeared behind them, cutting off retreat. They were boxed on the open slope, bad terrain, no cover, except scattered sage. "Just passing through," Akacheta said evenly. "Not without paying toll." Clubfoot Charlie spat tobacco. "That fancy ledger under the girl's arm, that'll do." So they knew. Voss's reach was longer than expected, or Grigg had wired ahead. Either way, it meant these men had been waiting. "The book is not for trade." The young gun drew his revolver, hands shaking. "Then we take it off your corpse." Time slowed. Akacheta assessed angles, odds, options, all bad. 5 armed men opened ground Liesel directly in the line of fire. Before he could move, the paint horse reared at the sudden tension. Liesel grabbed the saddle horn, clutching the ledger. Akacheta used the horse's movement as cover, sliding off the left side and pulling Liesel with him. They hit the ground rolling as the first shots cracked out. Bullets whined overhead. Akacheta shoved Liesel toward a cluster of boulders, upslope, weathered sandstone rimrock offering the only cover. "Run." She ran, bent low legs pumping despite blistered feet. More shots. One grazed her sleeve, burning a line across her upper arm. She stumbled, nearly dropped the ledger, caught herself. Behind her, Akacheta fired twice. The young gun cried out, his horse rearing. But the others were spreading out, flanking. Liesel reached the rocks and dove behind them. Akacheta came in fast, rolling into cover beside her. Blood stained his side where a bullet had torn through his shirt, ripping a gash across his ribs. Not deep, but bleeding freely. "How bad?" she gasped. "Not fatal." He checked his revolver, 4 shots left. "Stay low." Deaf Dan and Clubfoot Charlie were riding up opposite sides of the slope. The other 2 had dismounted, advancing on foot with rifles. "Professional tactics, for when they know where to go, Cheyenne," Dan shouted. "Hand over the book and the girl." Boss wants them both intact if possible. You we can bury. Akacheta scanned their position. The rim rock offered protection from below, but left them exposed from above. He needed to disrupt their approach. The ledger, he said to Liesel. How heavy? 3-4 pounds. Why, when I say throw it at the left rider, aim for his horse's head. She stared at him. You want me to? Distraction, not gift. Trust me. Trust. That word again. Liesel gripped the ledger, peering through a gap in the rocks. Now, Akacheta whispered. Liesel stood half upright and hurled the ledger with everything she had. It spun through the air and struck the horse squarely on the nose. The animal spooked, rearing and kicking. The rifleman lunged for the reins and missed. The horse bolted downslope, crashing into clubfoot Charlie's mount. Both animals panicked. Akacheta moved. He vaulted the rocks and sprinted low toward the confusion. The rifleman turned, bringing his weapon up. Akacheta fired the shot, took the man in the shoulder, spinning him. Another stride, and Akacheta was on him, rifle butt to the jaw. The man collapsed. But Clubfoot Charlie recovered fast. He raised his pistol, aiming at Akacheta's exposed back. Liesel screamed a warning. Akacheta twisted, but there was nowhere to go. A gunshot cracked, but not from Charlie. The outlaw jerked his pistol, flying from his hand. Blood bloomed on his gun arm. He howled, clutching the wound. From the rim rock above, a figure emerged, Silent Jack, the enigmatic drifter Liesel had glimpsed once in Dry River. He held a smoking rifle, his weathered face expressionless. Deaf Dan saw the new player and spurred his horse, fleeing downslope. The remaining rider hesitated, then followed. In seconds, the skirmish was over. Akacheta staggered, pain flaring in his gashed side. Liesel scrambled down to him, her hands immediately pressing against the wound to staunch the bleeding. You're hurt, she said, voice tight. Notice that. He gritted his teeth. But alive thanks to you. And him. Silent Jack descended the rim rock with easy grace, retrieved the ledger from where it had landed, brushed it off and handed it to Liesel without comment. Then he turned his attention to Akacheta's wound. Clean through. Bleeding's not too bad. You'll live if we treat it. Jack's voice was quiet, measured. Question is, why are 5 hired guns waiting in ambush at Bison Trace? Telegraph station, Akacheta managed. We came to wire Rock Creek. Station's been wrecked. Operator hauled off by Griggs' deputies 3 days back. Jack nodded toward the scattered buildings. Town's been watched since. Voss put word out, big bounty on that ledger and the Albino girl. Liesel's heart sank. Then how do we get word to the marshal? Jack studied them both for a long moment. Finally, he gestured toward the rocks. Get under cover. I'll explain what you're actually up against. They moved into shelter. Liesel tore strips from her underskirt and bound Akacheta's wound tightly while Jack kept watch. Her hands shook but stayed steady on the task, pressing cloth firmly despite his sharp intake of breath. You're shaking, Akacheta observed. Just my hands. She tied off the bandage. The rest of me is furious. This time he definitely smiled, though pain pinched the edges. Good. Fury keeps you alive longer than fear. Jack settled onto a rock rifle across his knees. The situation is worse than you know. Radek's planning something big, a special session of the territorial court to adjudicate water rights under prior appropriation in 2 days at Dry River. He'll present forged deeds and appropriation claims to legalize his dam, then seize any unregistered wells under prior claim doctrine. Anyone who protests gets branded a squatter or worse. He's working with Voss to ensure objectors, especially women with property claims, disappear into the bride scheme. Federal law. Liesel started. Doesn't reach out here fast enough, Jack interrupted. Territorial courts are bought. By the time federal marshals investigate, Radek will have legal ownership locked down, and Voss will have moved his trafficking outfit to a new territory. Akacheta's jaw tightened. Then we have 2 days to stop them. Jack nodded slowly. Which is why I'm here. I've been tracking this for weeks. That ledger is the key documented proof that connects Voss's trafficking to interstate crimes, which makes it federal jurisdiction. But getting it to Rock Creek through hostile territory. He shook his head. You won't make it, not with every gun in the territory watching for you. So what do you suggest? Liesl demanded. Jack's expression was grim. We bring the fight to them. Expose the outfit, locally destroy Radek's claim at the source, and survive long enough for federal help to arrive. He paused. And we start by finding allies you didn't know you had. By evening, they had descended into Bison Trace proper under Jack's guidance. The trading post doubled as a makeshift clinic where Dr. Sylvia Marchand waited with medical supplies and grim news. The telegraph operator was Kate's cousin, she explained as she stitched Akacheta's wound. Kate, the school teacher from Dry River, she's been sheltering women who escaped Voss's contracts. When Griggs' men took the operator, Kate got word out through Evander Pike. How many women? Liesl asked. 7 that we know of. 3 more disappeared last month. Sylvia tied off the last stitch. This special hearing of the Territorial Court on Water Rights Radek is staging. It's the final piece. He'll claim the women's late husband's properties through forged transfer deeds, consolidate all water rights, and leave anyone who protests with no legal standing. Jack leaned against the wall. Which means we have 2 objectives: dismantle Voss's outfit and break Radek's water monopoly. Do both, and the whole corrupt structure collapses. How? Liesl looked at them. We're outnumbered and outgunned. Carefully, Akacheta said, and with help. That help arrived near midnight. Evander Pike, a weathered farmer with soil permanently ground into his hands. Kate, the schoolteacher with intelligent eyes and a bruised jaw. And Awanata, a Cheyenne woman who spoke little English but communicated fluently with Akacheta. They planned through the night, mapping strategies. Evander knew the town's rhythms. Kate knew which townspeople could be trusted. Awanata knew which warriors would help. And Jack knew how to stage diversions. As dawn approached, Liesl found herself standing outside with Akacheta, watching the sky lighten. How is the pain? She asked quietly. Manageable. I've had worse. He glanced at her. You handled yourself well yesterday. The snake, the ambush, throwing the ledger, no panic. I was terrified. Terror and panic are different. Terror keeps you sharp. He paused. Your father was right about one thing. You are not cursed. You are simply different. And that difference has become valuable. Liesl felt warmth bloom in her chest. You keep saving my life. You keep saving mine. The ledger throw the warning shout. He smiled slightly. We are even. They stood together in companionable silence, and Liesl became aware of how close he was standing, the heat radiating from his body in the cool morning air. When she swayed slightly, his hand came up instinctively to steady her elbow. Their eyes met, held. When this is over, Liesl said softly, what will you do? Akacheta's thumb brushed across her arm, a small unconscious gesture. Depends on whether we survive. Ask me again when the shooting stops. It was not a promise, not quite. But it was acknowledgement that there might be an after worth imagining. The next day brought careful preparation. Jack revealed his true identity. Deputy U.S. Marshal Jack Hale, working undercover for 6 months to build a case against Voss's conspiracy kidnapping across territorial lines, mail fraud, and peonage violations under the 1867 Anti-Peonage Act ring. Your mother's documentation is the keystone I needed, he told Liesl, showing her his badge and federal warrants. Without it, we have suspicions. With it, we have prosecutable crimes. Why didn't you say something sooner? Anger flared in Liesl's chest. Because Voss would have scattered his outfit, and you would be dead, Jack said bluntly. Now with the ledger secured and federal warrants prepared, we can act. But there's a complication. He pulled out wanted posters. Liesl and Acacheta's faces stared back crude drawings, but recognizable. Griggs issued murder warrants. Claims you killed Franklin for his property. $500 on each of your heads. Acacheta absorbed this without visible reaction. So, we are outlaws now. In territorial law, yes. In federal law, you're witnesses under my protection. But I can't enforce that openly without alerting Voss that prosecution is coming. Jack's frustration showed. Federal marshals are 2 days out. We need to keep Radek and Voss here and focused until backup arrives. They refined the plan, 3 simultaneous operations. Phase 1. Jack and Evander would destroy Radek's dam using mining explosives, draining his reservoir and restoring downstream flow. Phase 2. While Radek's men dealt with the dam crisis, Acacheta and Liesl would raid Voss's bank office, seizing contracts and financial records. Phase 3. Kate would evacuate the sheltered women to Awanata's hidden camp before Voss could retaliate. It was desperate, built on timing and luck. But it was all they had. That night, Liesl couldn't sleep. She found Acacheta sitting watch by the spring, his torso freshly bandaged. She approached quietly and sat beside him. How's the wound? Hurts, but I've had worse. He glanced at her. You handled yourself well today. No panic. I was terrified. Terror and panic are different. Terror keeps you sharp. His hand moved to adjust the bandage. She reached out and took his hand, examining his bruised knuckles. You fight like you expect to take hits. I fight to win. Hits are part of winning. She smiled faintly. That's very pragmatic. Survival usually is. Their hands remained connected, her pale fingers against his darker skin. The moment stretched, comfortable silence settling between them. I have to return to my people soon to coordinate the warriors' help, Acacheta said carefully. But I'd like to come back after, if you're willing. Liesl's heart kicked. Come back. To see you, if that's something you'd want. She turned to face him fully. I'd want that. Very much. Relief flickered across his features. He reached out, tucking a loose strand of her pale hair behind her ear. Your difference isn't a curse. It's just a difference. And it's become valuable to me. She caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. You make me believe that. They might have kissed then, but voices called Kate, arriving with news. The moment passed, but the promise remained. The next night, chaos erupted across 3 locations simultaneously. At the dam, Jack and Evander placed charges with surgical precision. The explosions came at dawn, deep crumps that punched holes in the earthwork. Water found freedom, draining the reservoir in a brown, tumbling wall. Radek's guards scrambled to high ground as the flood swept their posts away. In Dry River, the river dry for 2 years, suddenly surged back to life. People poured into the streets, watching in awe. At Radek's ranch, the rancher's face turned brick red with fury. What in blazes? He was already moving, bellowing orders. Within minutes, a dozen riders thundered north toward the dam, Radek at their head, which left the town suddenly undermanned. Liesl, Acacheta, Kate, and Dr. Sylvia moved fast. They slipped into Voss's bank through the back door lock picked by Akacheta with tools Jack had provided. The main office was dark shadows, pooling in corners. Liesel spotted the locked cabinet against the far wall. Akacheta examined the lock, then produced picks and worked the mechanism. While he worked, Liesel kept watch at the front window. The street outside was frenzied with activity. Good. Footsteps on the boardwalk. Her heart lurched. A figure approached the door. "Someone's coming," she hissed. Akacheta's fingers flew. The lock clicked open. He yanked the cabinet doors wide, revealing stacks of documents and ledgers. Too much to carry. He scanned quickly, pulling files marked with recent dates. The front door opened. Sheriff Grigg entered, hand on his holstered pistol. Akacheta positioned himself beside the door. As Grigg scanned the dark office, Akacheta struck fast, elbow to throat, fist to kidney. Grigg staggered, gasping. Before he could draw his weapon, Akacheta had him in a chokehold, applying pressure until the sheriff's movement slowed, then ceased. He lowered Grigg's unconscious body to the floor. "Is he dead?" Liesel whispered. "Unconscious. He'll wake angry." Akacheta grabbed the canvas bag stuffed with documents. "Now we run." They fled through the back into the alley, sprinting toward the rendezvous point. Behind them, shouts erupted. Someone had discovered Grigg. At the schoolhouse, Kate had gathered the 7 women. Evander's widow Mary had a wagon hitched ready to move. "Go now." Jack appeared from a side street. They've realized it's not just the dam. Grigg's awake and furious. The women piled into the wagon. They took back trails, avoiding main roads, heading for Awanata's camp. But at a narrow creek crossing, riders appeared, Radek's men, 3 of them. Guns came up. "Stop the wagon or we shoot the horses." Mary hesitated. A gunshot cracked from the tree line. One rider flew backward from his saddle. The others wheeled, searching for the shooter. Jack worked his rifle with mechanical precision. 2 more shots. The second rider took a bullet and fled. The third charged Jack's position. Jack stepped from cover, aimed, fired once. The rider's horse collapsed. Jack disarmed him with a brutal rifle butt. "Move," Jack shouted. They crossed the creek and vanished into darkness, reaching Awanata's hidden camp as dawn broke. The women stumbled out, exhausted but safe. Liesel and Akacheta spread the stolen documents across a makeshift table. Under lamplight, they compared contracts to ledger entries. Every contract bore forged signatures witnessed by Grigg. The husbands listed were Voss's debtors. Transfer deeds attached to each signed over property rights directly to Radek Holdings. "It's a land scheme wrapped in human trafficking," Liesel said, voice hollow. Akacheta found a file marked Hob E. He handed it to Liesel without speaking. Inside was her mother's name. A marriage contract legitimate. But attached was a transfer deed signed by Emma 5 years later, surrendering spring rights to Radek Holdings. The signature looked close, but Liesel knew her mother's handwriting. This was forged. Clipped to the deed was a note in Voss's handwriting. "Refuse to honor transfer. Arrange accident. Spring rights revert to husband, who will comply." Liesel's hands shook so hard the paper rattled. "They killed her. For water rights." Akacheta's hand covered hers, steadying. "And now we have proof." But there was more bad news. Word came through Awanata's scouts Evander Pike had been ambushed at his homestead after the dam destruction. Radek's men had shot him dead and torched his well house. His widow Mary wept and then steeled herself with grim determination. Worse, Radek's men had tracked the women's evacuation route and discovered Awanata's camp location. They were planning a dawn raid. "We can't stay here," Jack said. "We need to move the women again somewhere more defensible." Or we end this now, Akacheta said quietly. We have the evidence. We force a confrontation at the special hearing of the Territorial Court on water rights tomorrow, present everything publicly, and dare them to act against federal authority. That's walking into a trap, Kate protested. All of this is a trap, Liesl said. The question is whether we spring it on our terms or theirs. They argued through the night, but ultimately Akacheta and Liesl's logic won. They would attend the special hearing of the Territorial Court on water rights, with the ledger, the contract's witnesses, and Jack's federal authority. Force a public reckoning. As they prepared to ride out before dawn, Liesl found Akacheta checking his weapons, his wounded side clearly paining him. You should rest, she said. So should you. Yet here we both are. He winced, adjusting his bandage. She moved closer, her hand replacing his on the dressing. Let me. He allowed it, watching her face as she checked the wound. It was healing, but still raw. It'll hold, she said quietly. It has to. His hand covered hers briefly. Liesl, if this goes badly, don't. She met his eyes. We survive this, together. Then we figure out what comes next. He nodded, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could feel his breath smell sage and smoke, and something distinctly him. Then duty called them apart. The special hearing of the Territorial Court on Water Rights convened at noon in the High Card Saloon, Dry River's largest building. The room was packed, townspeople compelled to attend Voss's debtors, Radek's hired guns lining the walls. At the front, a makeshift bench had been erected, and Territorial Judge Harker, a weasel-faced man in a cheap suit, presided. Radek sat beside him, smug despite the dam's destruction. Voss was there too, looking nervous. Judge Harker banged his gavel. This emergency session will address the illegal destruction of critical water infrastructure. The saloon doors slammed open. Liesl strode in, soaked from morning rain, the ledger clutched in her hands. Akacheta, Kate, and Dr. Sylvia flanked her. The room fell silent. Radek half rose from his chair, face darkening. Seize them. They're wanted for exposing your crimes. Liesl interrupted, her voice carrying across the room. She walked to the front and slapped the ledger onto the judge's bench. This documents 5 years of human trafficking, land fraud, and murder. My mother started it. My father died protecting it. And I'm here to finish it. You have no authority, Judge Harker sputtered. But I do. Jack Hale stepped forward from the crowd, pulling his badge from inside his coat and holding it high. Deputy U.S. Marshal Jack Hale. I have federal warrants for Carl Radek, Mortimer Voss, and Sheriff Yancey Grigg for conspiracy kidnapping across territorial lines, mail fraud and peonage violations under the 1867 Anti-Peonage Act, conspiracy and murder. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Voss went pale. Grigg's hand moved toward his gun. You shoot a federal officer, there's no walking back. Jack said coldly, his rifle aimed at Radek's chest. The marshals coming tomorrow will hang you on sight. Liesl opened the ledger. This book names victims, documents, forged contracts, traces money from Chicago to San Francisco. Every woman trafficked, every property stolen. She held up her mother's note. And this proves my mother was murdered by Voss and Radek for water rights they wanted to steal. Kate stepped forward with Clara, one of the rescued women. I've been sheltering the victims Voss tried to destroy. They're ready to testify. Dr. Sylvia added, I have medical records documenting injuries consistent with forced captivity and abuse. The crowd began murmuring, anger building. Radek saw his control slipping. His hand moved toward his pistol. This is lies, all of it. Then explain this. Liesl pulled out the forged transfer deed with her mother's signature. She couldn't have signed this because she was already dead. Someone forged it to steal her water rights. Radek's fury exploded. "You destroyed my damn you albino witch!" He drew his pistol. Everything happened at once. Akacheta moved, placing himself between Radek and Liesel. Kate screamed. The crowd scattered, tables overturning in panic. Radek fired. The bullet went wide. Jack fired back his shot, taking Radek in the shoulder, spinning him. Grigg drew his weapon. One of Radek's men fired at Jack, missing. Then someone kicked over a lantern. Oil ignited flames, spreading across the sawdust-covered floor with terrifying speed. The saloon became an inferno. "Out, everyone, out!" Jack bellowed. The townspeople fled through doors and windows. Kate dragged Clara toward the back exit. Dr. Sylvia herded other witnesses to safety. Liesel saw Voss trying to escape and grabbed his collar, slamming him against the wall. "You don't get to run," she snarled, pressing her small revolver against his ribs. "Not from my mother," Voss whimpered. "I'll testify. I'll give you everyone. You'll give Marshal Hale your testimony." She shoved him toward the door. Outside, rain poured down. The saloon was fully engulfed of flames leaping from windows. People scattered in every direction. Radek emerged from the smoke, wounded, but moving his face, a mask of blood and fury. He saw Liesel and charged, roaring incoherently. Akacheta intercepted him. They collided with bone-jarring force, grappling in the mud. Radek was bigger, but Akacheta fought with cold precision. They traded brutal blows, fists, elbows, knees. They rolled down the street toward the river, now swollen with runoff from the destroyed dam and the storm. The current was a roaring monster, carrying debris and frothing white. Radek got his hands around Akacheta's throat, forcing him toward the water. Akacheta's fingers found Radek's face, thumbs pressing into his eyes. Radek screamed, releasing his grip. Akacheta rolled away, gasping. But Radek lunged again, blind with rage and pain. They grappled at the river's edge. The bank gave way. Both men plunged into the torrent. The current seized them, dragging them under. Liesel screamed, running downstream. She saw Akacheta surface, fighting the water, then vanish around a bend, choked with debris. Without thinking, she dove in. The river was ice and violence. It pulled her under, immediately tumbling her like a leaf. She fought to the surface, choking, and saw a massive cottonwood log bearing down. She grabbed it, clinging desperately. Ahead, she glimpsed Akacheta. He had caught a submerged boulder half out of the water. Radek was gone, swept away, and drowned. The log she clung to was angling toward Akacheta's position. The log struck the boulder with jarring force. Liesel lunged, grabbing Akacheta's outstretched hand. Their fingers locked. She pulled. He pulled. The current tore at them both, trying to rip them apart. "Let go," he shouted over the roar. "Save yourself." "Shut up." She hooked her legs around the log, using it as leverage, and hauled with everything she had. Inch by inch, he came closer until he could grab the log too. Downstream, a makeshift bridge appeared, planks lashed between boulders, one end already in the water. Kate and Jack were on the near bank, throwing a rope. "Catch it!" Kate screamed. The rope snaked through the air. Liesel grabbed it one-handed, the other still locked with Akacheta's. The current slammed them against the boulder again, nearly breaking their grip. Pain exploded through her ribs. She held on. Kate, Jack, and townspeople who'd rushed to help hauled on the rope, their combined strength pulling them toward the bank. They reached the shallows and crawled out, collapsing in the mud. Liesel's lungs burned. Akacheta's face was white with cold and exhaustion. But they were alive. Further downstream, Radek's body surfaced, briefly tangled in debris, then vanished beneath the churning water for good. Jack staggered upright, cradling his wounded forearm. "Voss." Dr. Sylvia pointed to where she had the banker tied to a hitching post with medical bandages. Secured. The storm began to break. Sunlight pierced the clouds in golden shafts, illuminating the destruction. The burned saloon, the flooding street, the people standing shell-shocked in the aftermath. But the water flowed freely again. The ledger had survived, protected in its oilcloth wrapping. And Voss was in custody, already babbling names and locations in exchange for mercy he wouldn't receive. Akacheda's grip tightened on Liesel's hand. You jumped in after me. You would have done the same. That doesn't make it less foolish or brave. Something shifted in his expression. Thank you. She managed a tired smile. We're even now. The federal marshals arrived the next day, 3 grim-faced men who surveyed the chaos with professional resignation. Marshal Coulter, the silver-haired leader, accepted the ledger from Jack with something approaching reverence. This is extraordinary documentation, he said, flipping through Emma Hobbs' meticulous notes. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Miss Hobb. She died for it, Liesel said quietly. I just finished what she started. Over the following days, the marshals conducted interviews and documented evidence. Judge Harker was arrested for corruption. 3 of Raddick's surviving men were charged with attempted murder. A warrant was issued for the Chicago financier who'd bankrolled Voss's outfit. The women gave formal testimony, Clara and all 7 others, their courage providing the foundation for prosecution. Kate worked tirelessly to reunite some with Eastern families, while others chose to stay and rebuild their lives in the territory. Franklin Hobb was buried on a hillside overlooking the restored river. Liesel placed a tin coffee cup on his grave, the same cup they'd shared that first night, and whispered forgiveness for his failures and gratitude for his sacrifice. A week after the trials began, Marshal Coulter returned with surprising news. We found documentation in the Territorial Land Office, your mother's original water rights claim filed before her marriage. It's valid, predating Raddick's dam by 15 years. The spring and 40 acres are legally yours. He handed her another document. There's also a mineral rights notation. Silver ore deposits discovered during well excavation. The survey suggests a moderate vein. Liesel stared, overwhelmed. I don't understand. Your mother protected more than water. She protected your future. He produced a bank draft. After settling claims and federal seizures, Raddick's estate liquidation leaves a surplus. You're entitled to compensatory damages, $5,000. $5,000. Land, water, silver. It was more than she could process. And one more thing. Coulter handed her a sealed envelope. From Voss's personal safe, addressed to you. Inside was a letter in her mother's elegant handwriting, Dearest Liesel. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the fight I began has fallen to you. I pray you never need this letter, but I am a practical woman. The spring is yours by right. The silver beneath it is our family's future, yours and your father's, if he can forgive himself. I know he struggles with your appearance, with the cruel superstitions of others. It breaks my heart. But I have seen your strength, my darling girl. You are not cursed. You are my greatest treasure. I have documented corruption because silence is complicity. If they move against us, this will be my voice. Do not mourn me. Finish the work. Then live freely without shame, without fear. You are loved. You are powerful. You are enough. Your mother always, Emma Liesel, read it 3 times, tears streaming before she carefully folded it and tucked it against her heart. Her mother had known, had prepared, had loved her fiercely enough to die protecting her future. 6 months later, the spring ran clear and sweet on the 40 acres that now bore Liesel's name. A small cabin stood beside it, half shelter, half office for the water cooperative they were establishing. The plan was revolutionary for the territory's shared access to the spring, for both Cheyenne families and settler homesteads managed by a council with representatives from both communities. No hoarding, no monopolies. Just water distributed fairly and used wisely. Akacheta and Liesel co-chaired the first meeting, translating languages and cultures, finding common ground in mutual survival. It was idealistic. It was also necessary. And it was working. The silver mine was being developed under a partnership that employed local miners fairly, with profits funding the school Kate had reopened and Dr. Sylvia's expanded clinic. The seized bribe money had been put toward community rebuilding, turning the spoils of corruption into something good. The trials in Denver resulted in 17 convictions. Voss received 20 years in federal prison. The Chicago financier was arrested separately. The trafficking ring was dismantled, its victims offered compensation and support. And on a hillside overlooking the river, a young cottonwood grew tall and strong near Franklin's grave, its roots drinking deep from water that had been worth dying for, and ultimately worth living for even more. Liesel stood at the spring one evening as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Akacheta approached, moving carefully. His wound had healed, but left a scar he would carry, always a reminder of what they'd survived together. "Tired?" he asked. "Content?" She smiled. "There's a difference." He settled beside her on the stone, close enough that their shoulders touched. "The council meeting went well. Your proposal for seasonal water allocation was brilliant. It was your idea first. I just translated it into legal language. Then we make a good team." "We do." She turned to face him fully. They had been dancing around this for months, working together, building trust and friendship, but both hesitant to name what was growing between them. "Akacheta, I'm staying," he said quietly, his dark eyes holding hers. "Permanently, if that's something you want." Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. "I want that. Very much." He reached up his calloused hand, cupping her face gently. "You are brave and fierce and compassionate. You fight for what's right, even when it costs you. And you see me not as a savage or a curiosity, but as a man." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I want to build this life with you. Not because the cooperative needs it, but because I need it. Because you've become essential." Tears pricked her eyes, but these were born of joy and relief and fierce certainty. "I was afraid you'd leave when the danger passed. Nothing about you feels temporary." He smiled, rare and unguarded. "You are the most permanent thing in my life." She rose on her toes and kissed him finally after months of restraint. It was not desperate or frantic, but slow and sure, a promise sealed. His arms came around her solid and steady, and she leaned into his strength as he leaned into hers. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers. "So we're doing this. We're doing this." She smiled, radiant. "Together, like always." "Together," he echoed and kissed her again as the prairie wind sang around them and the spring bubbled its eternal song. Months later, when Kate brought school children to learn about water conservation, she found them teaching side by side, Liesel explaining legal frameworks, Akacheta demonstrating traditional irrigation techniques. The children listened raptly to these two leaders who had forged peace from violence. One pale-haired girl raised her hand. "Miss Liesel, why do you look different?" Kate tensed, but Liesel just smiled. "I have a condition called albinism. It makes my skin and hair very light. Some people used to think it was a curse. But it's just how I'm made, no better or worse than anyone else. Just different. I think it's pretty," the girls said matter-of-factly, and other children nodded agreement. After they left, Akacheta found Liesel at the spring, her face turned toward the sun. "What are you thinking?" he asked, settling beside her. "That my mother was right. I am enough. We all are." She took his hand. "And that we built something good from all that pain." He kissed her temple. "We did, and we're not done yet." "No," she agreed, smiling. "We're not." The spring flowed, pure, sustaining Cheyenne and settler alike. Emma Hobbs' legacy lived in the cooperative she never saw, in the justice her daughter secured, in the partnership that defied every prejudice of the brutal frontier, and in a waterproof box buried at the base of the cottonwood on Franklin's grave. Emma's letter and the ledger waited for future generations to discover proof that ordinary people fought back, that corruption could be defeated, that justice, however slow, was worth pursuing. Liesel and Akacheta walked back toward their cabin as evening descended, hand in hand toward the life they were building one day at a time. Different, scarred, unbroken, and finally, impossibly free.